Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, is made possible in part by Allstate and the Searle Funds at the Chicago Community Trust.
Good evening y bienvenidos to Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices. I'm Joanna Hernandez. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, a shortfall of 120,000 units of affordable housing. We're looking at how neighbors are working to fix it. You've probably heard of food deserts, but what impact are pharmacy deserts having on the health of Chicagoans on the south and west sides?
We're here to help them in their language.
How suburban libraries are welcoming Spanish-speaking Latinos with open arms and open books. And the landscapes and people of Puerto Rico are the focus of an art show making a rare visit to Chicago from the island. The city has a shortfall of about 120,000 units of affordable housing. That's according to Chicago's Department of Housing. And it's an even bigger problem in rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods like Logan Square and Pilson, where luxury developments are pricing longtime residents out of their communities. But despite that, the Lucy Gonzalez Parsons apartments opened this year near the Logan Square Blue Line stations. Further south, the Pilson Housing Cooperative has become a blueprint for community-led affordable housing. Marissa Parra recently spoke with Bickerdike Redevelopment Corporation, the Pilsen Housing Corporation, and Palenque Logan Square Neighborhood Association about affordable housing in Chicago. She began by asking about the planning efforts for the Parsons project.
Well, it takes, unfortunately, it does take a little while to get an affordable housing project built, and that's usually because there are so many layers of financing that we need to assemble to make it affordable. And so I think it is 100 units makes complete sense on the Logan Square Blue Line station because it's a transit-oriented development, an equitable transit-oriented development. And in order, that's a place where that supports height and density, and it's right on Kedzie Avenue along the commercial corridor and just off of Milwaukee Avenue, and it's a pretty lively area. And so 100 units of affordable housing is appropriate for that site and makes a lot of sense.
Christian, we know that Palenque LSNA was part of the effort to get Parsons apartments built. Why do you think it's important to choose Logan Square? She touched on how it's a lively area. Is there anything else that made you think that low-cost housing was really needed?
Well, Logan Square has been suffering for a long time, suffering through the impacts of displacement. And that displacement has only been exacerbated by the health crisis we've been living through with COVID-19. And despite the economic downturn of COVID-19, rents have only gone up. And more competition for housing is happening in our neighborhood. And it's really difficult for families, particularly families who have kids in schools, when their rents are raised overnight by $500 to $600. And when they look for new apartments to move into, it's impossible to find anything below $1,500, $1,600. And those units that we do find are often one bedrooms or studios that can't fit the average Latinx family. So what's really special about the Lucy Gonzalez Parsons apartments, which we just celebrated the ribbon cutting with Joy and Bickerdike a couple weeks ago, is that these are family-sized units. So not only are they affordable, but they can actually fit the average Latinx family. And this is a monument to racial equity and to a new direction that our community is taking. So we're very proud of the accomplishment. We're so happy that Bickerdike is the developer, and we hope we can see more projects like this in the future.
Well, I can see the pride on your face. Amanda, I want to come to you next, but first, the Pilsen Housing Cooperative is actually the subject of one of WTTW's first-hand series on segregation. I want to play a short clip for you.
Encontramos a PICO, que es una organización que es para artistas, que somos gente de la comunidad, gente que ha dejado raíces aquí en Pilsen, que nos reunimos para unir fuerzas y poder quedarnos aquí, tener algo propio, algo seguro, que sea nuestro, en un lugar donde ha sido tu casa por muchos años.
So obviously we heard that in Spanish. We saw the subtitles there in English. Amanda, can you tell me, how did this project come to be? When and why did you become a member?
So we have been working on PICO since 2016 as residents of the neighborhood, folks who lived next to each other. And I think we were really, really looking for an action-based sort of personal way that we could basically, say no to the displacement that was happening in Pilson, has been happening and has been planned for a very long time. And I think that it's just a really personal and sort of political and action-based model that has really, really worked. You just heard Garen talking about how important it was for her to stay in her community. We've built up so many resources over many decades in Pilsen, and a lot of that work, I feel like when folks get displaced, it kind of goes away. And so that was our motivation for forming the Pilsen Housing Cooperative.
Joy, I have a question for you. When it comes to the barriers facing low-income housing developments, what do you feel like the biggest resistance is that you face?
First of all, just getting, talking to neighbors, getting the neighbors on board, addressing any resistance that comes up. And there's, typically in a gentrifying area, there is resistance. People have misconceptions about low and moderate income people. They don't realize that sometimes it's them or their neighbors or the people who they see every single day. They're not unknown people. And so I think that there are so many challenges, but, I think none that we don't know how to navigate and none that prevent us from, building the kind of housing that's needed.
Okay, well, Amanda, Christian, we have just over a minute here. I want to ask you the same question. The biggest barriers to getting a co-op off the ground. Christian, let's go to you next.
Definitely the dominant model of housing and the housing market is one that emphasizes land use as an investment, something that should be used to generate wealth. And I think we need to change this dominant narrative to one where we see land as a benefit for people whose primary purpose is to house us and to provide stability for our communities.
I would completely agree with Christian that a new sort of, or old actually, view on land and what land ownership is for is definitely what is called for in the city of Chicago and also across the country. And I think that's something that we're definitely doing at the Pilsen Housing Co-op.
Again, that was Marissa Parra speaking with Joy Agente, Amanda Cortez, and Christian Diaz about new affordable housing development in the city. Up next, Amanda Vinicky and the impact of pharmacy deserts on local communities in a conversation recorded earlier. Stay with us.
You might have heard about food deserts, areas where access to fresh food might not be easily accessible. But pockets of Chicago, particularly on the south and west sides, also lack convenient access to a local pharmacy. Joining us to talk about it are Cheyenne Daniels, a reporter with The Hill and a contributor with the Chicago Sun-Times. Daniels recently published a report with WBEZ on pharmacy deserts. And the researcher credited with coining the term pharmacy desert, Dima Cato, now director of the University of Southern California School of Pharmacy Program on Medicines and Public Health, previously at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Thanks to each of you. And Dima, let's begin with you. You, again, literally coined the term pharmacy desert. We know that, of course, medicines, prescriptions can be life-saving. But outside of the obvious, why are pharmacy deserts so problematic?
Well, pharmacies are vital to communities. They provide access not only to medicines, but a variety of other essential services, including vaccinations. and their kind of critical role in promoting public health in the community became very clear since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Any particular ways that you think this really was amplified during COVID?
In the beginning, pharmacies were key in testing, COVID testing. And later on, for COVID vaccinations, more than 75% of people that got their COVID vaccine got it at a retail pharmacy. And it became problematic when communities had a hard time finding pharmacies, let alone pharmacies that offered the vaccine. And in Chicago, those communities were on the south and west sides. And that, for me, wasn't not really kind of surprising, given that we knew that these communities are pharmacy deserts. And
Cheyenne, you, as well as WBEZ's reporters, did analyze this and really kind of drilled down more into where there are pharmacy deserts within Chicago. Can you summarize those findings?
Yeah, I think that what we saw was, especially based on Professor Cato's research, is that most of these pharmacy deserts are on the south and west sides. When we look at places like where Roseland, for instance, is one of those areas that has seen multiple locally owned pharmacies as well as conglomerates close over the past few years. And especially during the civil unrest of 2020, we saw quite a few of those stores close, in part due to lootings that they experienced. And so it's really in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods that these pharmacies have closed and taken away these services that these residents need.
Now, you touched on there are these big box kind of brand names, the Walgreens really in Chicago as well as CVS, but also a dwindling number of independent pharmacies. So, Dima, why is that, and what role in particular do both insurance companies and government policies play?
So when we talk about chains, so yes, Walgreens is the predominant chain in the city of Chicago. I think that's long been recognized. But independents play a really important role in communities of color, including in the south and west sides, including in pharmacy deserts. So even though pharmacies are far away, the nearest pharmacy is more likely to be an independent than a chain. And in terms of, government players, particularly in the state of Illinois, Medicaid, they play a huge role, them and, the pharmacy benefit managers that they contract with. And I say that for two reasons. One, pharmacies aren't reimbursed enough, especially pharmacies that we know serve predominantly publicly insured populations and therefore rely on Medicaid reimbursement rates to stay open. And two, Medicaid is also responsible for determining, where their beneficiaries could go to fill their medications. And oftentimes that's a chain. And for some plans like Aetna Medicaid, that chain is not Walgreens. That was discussed in the WBZ Sometimes story that Cheyenne co-wrote. It's CVS. And we know CVS isn't really conveniently located in these neighborhoods. So what that means is that there are fewer patients entering these independents, these non-preferred pharmacies, and therefore fewer prescriptions filled, less money for the pharmacy, and therefore making it really difficult to stay open.
Hard for them to survive without customers who can shop there for those medicines. Now, at the same time, Cheyenne, while there's certainly, it sounds like, an opportunity for government policy to change to fix this problem, Illinois is also giving pharmacists the opportunity to do more, to give vaccines, and also a new law will allow pharmacists to prescribe hormonal contraception, birth control, without a doctor's prescription. But they can't do that if there isn't a nearby pharmacy to go to, right?
Exactly. And I think one of the real fallouts of that we see is that it really impacts Black and brown women. And we already know that Black women, especially when it comes to maternal health care, maternal mortality rates, infant mortality rates, they have some of the worst health outcomes, if not the worst health outcomes than especially their white counterparts. And so having access to things like hormonal contraception can be a life-saving service at their disposal that they can't access without having these pharmacies in their communities.
Dima, how does Chicago stack up to other cities when it comes to pharmacy deserts?
It's the worst in terms of the difference between Black and brown communities and white neighborhoods. So the
disparities.
The disparities is just kind of starking, right? With 1% of white neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, we found were pharmacy deserts compared to 42%, almost a half of Black neighborhoods.
And Dima, just
5% of Hispanic neighborhoods.
Dima, briefly, of course, some people do get their medicine online. Why is that not an option, or does that change things at all?
So very few people get all their medicines online. We know that. And it's really not the solution, right? Because we're not talking about just prescriptions. So aside from the fact that pharmacies are providing other services, right? So the pharmacy is there not only to give you a medication, but there's other services they provide, including the COVID vaccine, right? Again, that was a great natural experiment about the importance of pharmacies. We've been trying to kind of argue it for 10 years, but COVID made it easy for us because it became apparent to the public quite quickly that if you want to partner and deliver essential services to the community, the pharmacy is the place to go.
And Cheyenne, last word goes to you. When you were interviewing people for your article, what were you hearing from folks?
There's a lot of despair, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, but there's also these ideas that, especially from many of the women that I spoke to and even local pharmacy owners that are saying, you know, it's possible to have these pharmacies in our neighborhoods. We just need the investment for it. We need the commitment from conglomerates, especially, to say, we do believe that you deserve to have these services in your in your communities, and we're going to bring that by putting our pharmacy in your community.
Thank you so much, Cheyenne Daniels and Dima Cato. Back with more Chicago Tonight Latino Voices right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Between 2000 to 2016, 6 of Chicago's suburbs flipped from majority white suburbs to a larger Latino population. That's a reflection of a broader trend of immigrants bypassing the historical port of entry neighborhoods in the city and settling directly in the suburbs. As the demographics of these communities have evolved, their institutions have had to find new ways to serve and engage those residents. Producer Erica Gunderson checked out 2 suburban libraries to see how they're going beyond just books.
Mi bonita sombrero, my beautiful hat.
When we have new families that are coming here for the first time, I want them to know that this is their library, this is their space.
Like all social institutions, the public library has had to evolve with the times.
People come here for passport services. People come to get their blood sugar, cholesterol screenings. People check out our library of things items, which include sewing machines or telescopes.
And as Latinos, especially immigrant Latinos, have increasingly settled in Chicago's suburbs over the years, suburban libraries have developed ways to better serve their changing communities.
We're here to help them in their language, and that we can also celebrate their cultural background as well.
At the Rounds Lake Public Library, a monthly book club offers readers the opportunity to discuss literature in their own language.
A lot of them, what they have told me is that they feel like this is an era of space and a time where they can just dedicate to themselves. We talk about the book and different point of views of everybody within the book and then in their lives, because we always find something to relate to.
Y ver que ya la biblioteca nos manda la información, toda nos la manda en español, pues a veces ese es como algo que pone uno de barrera, a veces el idioma, ¿verdad? Entonces, tener esta oportunidad en nuestra biblioteca de venir a buscar los libros muy interesantes en español, pues fue una de las cosas que más me motivó para venir.
Round Lake Library Head of Community Engagement Sandra Lopez says, during the early days of the COVID pandemic, patrons increasingly turned to the library for help with problems that went far beyond the stacks.
For example, the school district became virtual. A lot of the families in the school district didn't have computers or didn't know how to use computers, and they also had a language barrier. So we had our partner over at the school district reach out to us, say, hey, can you guys help? And we developed computer classes that we were able to give to parents in need.
In West Suburban North Lake, bilingual adult reference librarian Carla Alba says the staff develops its programming based on input from the community.
that means that they are trusting us more in terms of what they ask for. And if they do need something that they don't know whether we provide it or not, they feel like that they can come in and ask for it.
North Lake Youth Services librarian Jackie Cerrone says she draws upon her own upbringing when selecting resources for the children who come to her library.
The other day I had purchased books about El Cucuy, which is like a childhood myth, that us, especially in the Mexican community, we grew up listening to, which are now in story times.
North Lake patrons Fiona Ayala and Noemi Guisar Miranda both say they began coming to the North Lake Public Library to find activities for their children. But now they keep coming back for themselves, too.
So I was born in Mexico, came here, and just recently I took my citizenship test. And the fact that they offer that program so you can study for the test, it was one of the most amazing things.
Sorprenderte que en ningún lugar celebran el Día del Niño y aquí lo celebran. El Día de la Madre, el Día de los Muertos, y hacen eventos y cosas alusivas a esas tradiciones que nos hacen sentir orgullosos de nuestras raíces.
Both Ayala and Guisar Miranda say they often recommend the North Lake Library to friends and family, which librarians say is key to building trust in the community.
A lot of the time we feel that patrons will come in because they've talked to a family member or a friend.
It just makes me feel great that there is a place where you can feel comfortable. There's people that are still willing to help you out when you know you need the help. And it's a library a place that I never would have expected.
For Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, this is Erica Gunderson.
And you'll find more about the libraries on our website. Back with more Chicago Tonight Latino Voices right after this.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/daily briefing and sign up.
Earlier this month, just weeks before Hurricane Fiona hit Puerto Rico, a valuable collection of paintings arrived in Chicago from the island. They are loaned from an art museum in the town of Ponce on the southern coast. Now, Chicago's National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture is a temporary home to a small but significant exhibit. Producer Mark Vitale visited the museum in Humboldt Park.
This collection comes from a Museo de Arte de Ponce, the Museum of Ponce. It's an art museum. It's really the first museum to open up in the Caribbean and the first one to get accredited back in 1959.
Much of the museum remains closed following an earthquake in 2020.
The thing was that they have this collection, the biggest collection in the whole Caribbean. They wanted to do something with it. They wanted to stay relevant. They wanted to reach out to different places. And so they reached out to us and I said, I would love to have an art collection, an art exhibit made up of Puerto Rican artists.
It is historical artwork dating as far back as the 1700s, including paintings created during Puerto Rico's colonial era. Most focus on the landscape and the people of the island.
It's called Nostalgia for My Island. Not only will you feel nostalgic about the island if you've ever been there, but it has you dreaming, it has you thinking of different sorts of things. This exhibit deals with 3 issues. It deals with my people, my island, my home. These pieces as a whole have never left the island. These are pieces that we, as Puerto Ricans, we've seen in books. We may have seen pictures of them, but we have never really seen them in person. And so for us to have this collection here is just a remarkable thing.
The museum in Humboldt Park upgraded its galleries to secure and protect these rare works, most of which were painted in oil. We met a volunteer who's also an artist, and he grew up in the town of Ponce.
It is really emotional. It's the first time that we have this type of exhibition like this in Chicago, in U.S. And I know that a lot of people are definitely going to be super proud to be able to see. A lot of people that never had the opportunity to go to the museum in Ponce, that be able to see this work here, they will be overwhelmed for a lot of people, but it would be great. You see something different in every piece.
Something that did not make it out of Puerto Rico before the hurricane, most of the catalogs for the exhibition remain on the island.
What I want people to take away is that there's a history behind the Puerto Rican people. Yes, we are American citizens, but you should also take a look at who we are. Puerto Ricans are 1/3 Spaniard, 1/3 African, and 1/3 Taino India. This exhibit explains exactly who we are as Puerto Ricans.
For Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, this is Mark Vitale.
The exhibition is called Nostalgia for My Island. It just opened at the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture, and it's open until June 9th of next year. And that's our show for this weekend, but be sure to check out our website at WTTW.com/news for the very latest from WTTW News. And if you're watching us on Saturday night, know that you can also catch Latino Voices and Black Voices on Sundays beginning at 10 p.m. Now, from all of us here at Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, I'm Joanna Hernandez. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy, be safe. Buenas noches.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.